What's going on, everybody? This is Taj Dashaun. Welcome back to the Power of Story podcast. If you're listening on Thrive After Sports, thank you for tuning in there. We got a special treat for you today. I'm here with my man, Joe Hawley. What's going on, Joe?
Hey, man. Thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate it.
Hey, man, it's a pleasure to have you here. You know, before we really dive in, I got to give a special shout out to Tommy Maloney for originally connecting us. And obviously, you're a super busy guy. This is probably one of the busiest years I've ever had in my life. And then we got reconnected through Q Williams. So shout out to Coach Quinn, Coach Q Williams.
Yeah, man. Q's an amazing guy. And it's really such a reminder of what a small world it is and how we're all connected on an intimate level in deeper ways than we can even imagine.
Absolutely, man. And it's a pleasure to have you here because I already know you're going to be able to drop so many gems and so much value, not only through your story, but also just about your transition and everything you're doing afterwards. But just to give the listeners a little bit of background, I'm going to get out the way. Can you just introduce yourself and tell everybody a little bit about who Joe Hawley the man is?
Yeah. Wow. Where do I start? Who am I? That is I think that's a deep question that everybody should really take some time to sit down and ask yourself, because we are really the culmination of the stories that we've lived, the experiences we've had. And I've been blessed enough to have a wide range of experiences, some really unique experiences. And I feel like I'm just getting started, which is really cool. But yeah, my name is Joe Hawley. Grew up in Orange County, California. Played college ball at University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Was drafted in 2010 by the Atlanta Falcons in the 4th round and played there for 5 years. Had a really up and down career. Ended up getting released in 2015 after I blew my knee out. Got signed with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for 3 more seasons. And so I played a total of 8 years in the NFL. In 2017, my career was coming to an end, and it was because I felt in my heart it was time to move on. I think I probably could have pushed myself to play a couple more years, which I think a lot of guys in my position would have. But I felt this calling to be done. The business side of football really started to take its toll. The physical beating my body was taking was wearing me out. Ever since I blew my knee out, my body was just kind of falling apart. I was really an undersized. I played center, and I was really undersized lineman. And so I was, playing against these big 330-pound nose tackles, and it was really challenging physically. And then, mentally and emotionally, there's a lot of challenges as well. And although I still love the game of football, I got to a point where I was ready to move on. And in 2017, walked away from the game. During that time, I went through a pretty big transition in my relationship. I was engaged, and 3 or 4 weeks after my final game, I was like, wow, it all hit me. And I really, asking that question, who am I? I sat with that, and I didn't know who I was without the game I had spent my entire life pursuing greatness at. And I knew I had to get moving and figure out who I was. So I decided to go on a road trip to not only just rediscover myself and figure out who I was, but really to explore my freedom from the game I had spent my entire life playing. I played for 16 years. Didn't really know anything else. And football is not just show up on Sundays. It's a 24/7 job. And it's just you're always having to show up and see how you can improve. And it's such a high performing environment. It just comes with a lot of stress and anxiety, and you're constantly thinking about it. And so I just wanted to explore my freedom from that for a little while. So I ended up giving away all of my stuff to charity, bought a van, and rescued a dog, named her Freedom. And we decided to hit the road on an epic adventure across the country. And I thought it was only going to be for a few months. Ended up traveling for the better part of 2 years. And while I was on the road, I learned a lot about myself. It was a lot of time for deep reflection, a lot of time for learning. On the road, I was listening to a lot of podcasts, Audible books. I was getting into some spiritual practices, and just, finding my connection to myself and to nature, or to like a higher power in nature, and just figuring out where I fit in this world. And we can dive deeper into like all those lessons and all that, but it was just an eye-opening experience. And I came to a point where I was, okay, I'm kind of don't want to travel like this for my whole life. Like I want to show up and be of service in a bigger way. And so trying to figure out what my purpose is outside of football. And I think that's a lot of transitioning athletes have to face, is like, who am I without this thing? And now what am I supposed to be doing? And at such a young age, I was 29. I think I was 30 when I started asking, okay, like, what do I want to do now? And, I was really enthralled with this idea of entrepreneurship, creating something out of nothing and birthing this idea into reality. And I just didn't know what that was. So I tried a few different companies, just getting my feet wet, just learning a lot about, the world and trying to learn about the business world, and realized through the 2 years after football, how isolating that feels. And, I was the guy that decided to walk away from the game after a very long career, and realizing that a lot of people, their athletic careers are cut short before they're ready. And, for me to be walking away, knowing it's going to be my last year and still feeling that void in my heart and knowing that something's missing, I can't imagine what it's like for most athletes who don't make it as far as they want, or their careers are cut short. And I got involved in a couple different communities of like-minded people, and realized how powerful that was to be surrounded by a bunch of people that are focused on, self-development and reaching their highest potential, and realized that that's the one thing missing. I mean, athletes, especially team sport athletes, we're in a locker room surrounded by guys who are high achieving, high performing individuals who are focused on achieving something that's greater than themselves, and doing it for others, and just this community locker room aspect. And when you're done playing, that's one thing that's missing. It's all taken away from you in a moment. And so right now I'm just launched a community exclusively built for former male professional athletes. It's called the Heart Collective. And we're working on scaling and growing that right now. But that's just a place for guys who are focused on achieving greatness outside of sports, to come together, collaborate, and learn together and support one another, from other guys that really know what that experience is like, because it's just such a unique experience. It comes with unique challenges. And, what I found is it's hard for me to relate to somebody who hasn't been through that experience. I made a lot of money. I played for 8 years. I lived my childhood dream. And so it's hard for me to go to someone and be like, yeah, I'm really struggling, or, I want to go do something, but I don't know what my purpose is. I don't know who I am. And so I just thought I would really love and get a lot of value out of surrounding myself with other guys who are focused on achieving greatness, not just in football or in whatever sport they played, but really taking their lives to the next level, because we have so much life ahead of us. And so creating this community is really my passion and my purpose now, working on building that community out and adding value in that way.
That's awesome, Joe. There's just so much for us to unpack there, man. And I love that you were able to turn your struggles into something, with the Heart Collective, and be able to serve on others through your experience. But I'm going to be selfish for a second, man. I want to take it back just for my listeners, just to talk about that point in your life where you realized it was time to move on, right? Because obviously you played professionally. I didn't play professionally, but I work with a lot of former college players, and even collegiate level, this too, where they're not in love with the game anymore, man. Like you said, the business side kind of overrides the fun of the game. And you could have kept playing, but you made the decision ultimately to move on from that. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, just take a deeper dive into, how did you know? Like, did you kind of struggle back and forth a bit, or did it hit you like, hey, I can keep going, but I'm not going to? What was that moment like, or that process like, of being able to say, I'm done with this. I want to go explore and see what else I can do in this life?
Yeah, I think it was a slow process. I think, ever since I blew my knee out my 5th year, I kind of saw the end in sight. I obviously wanted to overcome that and keep working. But like my 7th year, I was ready to be done, and I was a free agent. I decided to test the market, ended up getting another contract with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And I was like, okay, I'll go give it another try. And I was the starter my 7th year. And then I went in and realized that I'd have to compete for my starting job again in training camp, which is, in the NFL, it's nonstop competing. Like you hear about the top 5% of the league on SportsCenter and stuff. And those guys, have pretty secure jobs because they're the top in the league, but most guys are fighting to stay there. And I was just, I was tired of having to prove myself over and over again. And it was just exhausting. And I ended up losing my starting job that training camp for the 5th time in my career. And the moment it came was week 1. I was on the sideline. I was an inactive player. And so I was in my street clothes. And as the offense was taking the field, I was kind of cheering the guys on and, supporting the new center and all that. And I realized, that was the first moment in my entire football career where I was content without going out on the field. Every other time I was on the sidelines, every time I lost my starting job, I had this fire in me. Like, I wanted to contribute. I wanted to be out on that field competing. And I felt like I wasn't even a part of the team unless I was doing that. But in that moment, I was like, I feel okay. I feel satisfied. I feel content with being on the sidelines. And that's when I knew, I was like, my heart's not in this anymore. It's time to move on. And I'm really grateful that it happened, because it gave me that whole final year to really, be present with the experience, all the difficulties, all the challenges, how bad my body felt, waking up early, all the time it took. I really was able to enjoy all of it, the wide breadth of experience, rather than complaining about it. I was like, this is my last year. I'm going to soak all of this up, all the good, all the bad, all the good times. And, it's slowly, it's really cool. Towards the end of that season, the universe kind of gave me this opportunity to play. So I was always trying to stay ready, in case my number was called as an inactive player. And it wasn't until like week 12 or week 13 of that year, 2 offensive linemen went on IR. And then all of a sudden I knew that I was the next guy up. And so the universe gave me this opportunity to go prove to myself and prove to the world that I still had it. Right. And there's a whole long story behind that, but I ended up playing those final 4 games, and I went through a lot of, not sure if I still had it. I was like out of shape. It's really hard to stay in game shape throughout a year, because, in the NFL, there's only so many players. And as the starters, get worn down through the brutal season that it is, the practices get easier. So unless you're playing in the games, it's really hard to be in game shape. And so I went 3 months without really playing in a game. And so I was really questioning, like, can I go do this? Can I still be out there and compete with the best in the world? And I saw the light at the end of the tunnel, and I was like, wow, like, it's right there. I'm almost done, and I have to go out there and do this thing. And it was just a lot of stress and anxiety. I ended up giving myself 2 ulcers because I was so stressed out. But it's really beautiful, because I went out there and I played 4 of the best games of my entire career. And so it was this opportunity to know, after I played my final game, I knew that I was walking away on my own terms. It wasn't because I couldn't play anymore. And that was a really good feeling, really good feeling. And, I think even though I was ready and excited about the challenges ahead and the new opportunities that were in front of me, that 3 or 4 weeks after the final game, and I was sitting on my couch, and I realized, wow, like, I'm never going to be able to play the game that I loved so much, that I enjoyed, that I've worked so hard to achieve, that the pinnacle, it's all in the rearview mirror. And that was really tough to come to terms with. And I think that's what led me to go on this trip, to really find out who I was without it.
Yeah, man. And I love how you talked about when you decided to go on this trip to kind of embrace the freedom that you had of no longer playing ball. You were very intentional about connecting with yourself, connecting with the higher power. I feel that, and you probably see this too in your experience. I'll just speak from my experience. When I was done playing ball, and this is just college football we're talking about here, I distracted myself a lot. So I did the total opposite. Rather than taking the deep dive, rather than trying to learn more about myself or my connectedness to a higher power or to the world or to other human beings, I distracted myself by drinking and partying and a whole bunch of Netflix and all that type of stuff. Can you just speak to your mindset behind, because it's almost like, I don't want to say you knew it instinctively, but you knew that in order to move to the next phase of your life, you were going to have to take that deep dive into yourself and into a higher power. Did you have some sort of like epiphany or revelation, or was it just like instinctively you knew you needed to do that to be able to move on?
Yeah, man. I don't want to give myself too much credit. I think when I went on the trip, it wasn't like I knew I was going to find myself. That's definitely what happened. But I think, yeah, man, it was this something in my heart was calling me to do that. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was my soul, maybe it was the higher power, God, like, guiding me. But it was just this innate knowing and trust. I think a lot of people, when they're transitioning, whether it's athletics or any big transition in life, the big fear is the fear of the unknown. And I've always had this innate trust to, like, kind of dive in. And, when I decided to hit the road, it was going to be like a 3-month kind of road trip, go, like, have fun. And then I realized it was just such a self-discovery out there on the road. And I think, what I like to tell people is, I think the big thing that helped me was the movement. Not only like physically moving and getting out of this environment that I was in, but continuing to, like, learn and focus on the future. And I think a piece of me was kind of running away from that, was running away from the career, the football, and not really looking at it and properly grieving the loss of it. And I think a lot of people distract, like you said, like, drinking, Netflix, like, not like, just kind of just distracting from that actual, like, processing what that grief is of that loss. And I think, I've been talking to a few different athletes that are transitioning, and there's this it's really good to have a moment of celebration and really celebrating your career and what you did and what you accomplished and how far you've come, and creating this transition point for yourself so that you can move on. But I think if you don't give yourself that moment of honoring where you've come from and how much you've accomplished in your life and letting it go and properly grieving that, whatever that looks like. I mean, for me, like I started journaling and really processing what that was and letting go of this past self of who I was so that I could allow space for who I wanted to become on a deeper level. So yeah, I think it's a process, man. And I think if I would have stayed in Tampa in that apartment that I had, obviously I mentioned I went through a breakup as well. And so there was the energy of that in there. And then being in the same city, as soon as the next football season would have come around, I would have saw all my close friends and teammates started back up in football. And I would have felt like that thing was missing. And so part of me is like, I need to get moving. I need to get moving and start figuring out what's next. I don't know what that is. So I'm just going to hit the road and see what happens. And there's a lot of fear behind that, but it takes a lot of courage to look that fear in the face and move towards it anyway. And so I had no idea what that trip was going to lead to. I just hit the road and I just trusted that this experience is going to help me heal that part of myself, and the synchronicities that happen in the road trip and all the things I learned and all the experiences I got to have and I gained from that really helped guide me on the path. But it was definitely just leaping into the unknown and not knowing and trusting it. And I think that's a big piece where, people, they get stuck. They get stagnant. They don't know what to do. And it's like, you don't need to know what to do. You just got to start moving towards something.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Joe. Because I know you said, you don't want to give yourself too much credit. It was almost as if you were being led down that path to take that journey. At the same time, you can almost be led down a path if you're not careful. The path I was talking about with drinking, which a lot of people do. But there was some level of being intentional there so that you could, even though you were being led in a direction of healing, like you said, and processing. And I think that's important for listeners to hear so they know if they're going through something similar, yes, you want to be led, but you want to be led down a right path and have some sort of agency over the path you're being led down so you can process your career, be proud of yourself, celebrate yourself, like you said, Joe, and then from there, be intentional about your next chapter. So speaking of next chapter, I want to talk about you get back from the trip. At the time, we're going to talk about the Heart Collective in just a second here, but when you came back from the trip, was the Heart Collective already on your radar, or did you have to go through like more trials and tribulations before you eventually came across what you're doing now on your new mission?
Yeah, it was definitely a process. So I definitely was intentional about the experience on the road. I was doing it mostly to explore my freedom, mostly to enjoy the freedom and the experience the road had to offer. And after about 8 months of traveling, that's when I started asking, okay, now what? Like, what am I supposed to be doing? What's my purpose? Being on the road, I started a blog and I was sharing the experience and some of my wisdom and experiences on the road, and realizing, the people that were reaching out to me and how I was inspiring them just through me living this experience and answering the call of my heart was really having an impact on people. And I realized, wow, that feels really good. I definitely want to use this platform I have to impact others, but I didn't know what that looked like. And it was a slow process realizing, I joined a community, it's called Fit for Service. And it's I don't know if you're familiar with Aubrey Marcus, but he's got a pretty big podcast, and he was the CEO of On It, which is a supplement company. He started this mastermind program, and I didn't really know what it was. I don't think anybody that joined it really did. But I answered the call because I felt an intuitive hit to join that community. And being a part of that community is really focused on self-development and reaching your highest potential and questioning the stories and the doubts and the self-limiting beliefs that we have that hold us back. And through that, I realized, wow, if I had this when I first walked away from the game, how much of an impact it would have to be around a community and brotherhood of guys that understand what I was going through. And there's nothing really like that, and I realized, learning all about entrepreneurship over the few years prior, everybody says, a good entrepreneur sees a hole in the market and then they, something that they could use, and then they go create it because it doesn't exist. And that's when the idea to create a community specifically for former male professional athletes to help guide them through the transition process, not because I know better and I have stuff to offer. I mean, I think I've learned a lot, but it's really because it's something I could, benefit from, just being surrounded by a bunch of guys. And so I wanted to create a community, bring guys around me so that we could support each other moving forward. And that was about, I don't know, 18 months ago. And the journey to get from that idea to actually launching it about 6 weeks ago was a long process. And, part of that process is overcoming my own self-limiting beliefs and my own doubts and my own fears. And it's fascinating. I had this, this innate feeling of unworthiness. I didn't feel capable. I felt scared to go back into the old world that I kind of, like I talked about earlier, a piece of me was running away because I felt like I never really stepped up into my full potential as a leader on the field. Had a lot of resistance to that. And so my whole journey really in this lifetime, I feel like, is to learn how to step up and be a leader. And so the whole first year of creating this company and this community was really about working through my own resistances and the things that were holding me back from stepping up and offering this kind of medicine and community for others. And it was a long road, man. And I'm so proud of myself for all of the things I learned and a lot of ups and downs, and really excited about, moving forward and continuing to grow and learn and realizing, one of the biggest things I think any athlete, I know you can probably attest to this, is, what makes a good athlete is we know how to fail faster than anyone else, learn from it, and take that and transmute it into positive stuff. So like you see someone on all these athletes on Sundays or Saturdays playing college ball, you see the culmination of all the minor little failures that they did either during the week or during the season of their life to get to the point where the product on the field where they're making these amazing plays. So they didn't just show up and do that, right? It takes all this work and constantly failing. And, being in the world, and especially in entrepreneurship, it's really about failing as fast as you can so that you can learn from those failures, because you're never going to be perfect, and letting those things come to you and not attaching your worthiness on the failure. Like real failure is deciding to quit and turn away. Right. And so and I felt this like, it felt like it feels like this thing is being created through me, right? It's like something that wants to be birthed into the world. And I think that's going back to your other point about finding purpose, and rather than numbing out and not looking at those things, it's really about finding stillness and like, trying to limit the distractions, coming back to yourself, and then being able to listen to what it is that wants to come through you. And if we're continuing to numb out and distract ourselves, we're never going to give ourselves an opportunity to find out what that is. And it takes a lot of courage to do that, because a lot of times the things that we're meant to do are the things that scare us the most. And what I like to tell people is, if you want to figure out what you're meant to do in the world, figure out what scares you and head towards that, because that's usually the things that we're being called to do and step up in a bigger way. And that's a really courageous act.
Oh man, and that ties in perfectly to what you were saying about wanting to step into your leadership. And that's probably what took, you said 18 months, right? Before the official launch 6 weeks ago.
Yep.
Okay. So that almost ties into what you were saying about the thing that scared you the most is being a leader. And you realize that by launching the Heart Collective, you were going to have to really step into your leadership. I love how you brought that full circle, man. Like one of my favorite things to say is that entrepreneurship is a form of personal development. And your story is a real testament to that, because you knew that before really getting this thing going, you were going to have to spend some time on Joe to be able to develop yourself into the person who could actually create something, lead something, and actually be impactful with something. Because a lot of people start things, we know that, Joe, but to actually follow through and have the impact that was intended from the jump, which you're already having, like we were talking about before we started recording, like 6 weeks in, it's already taken off, but it's because you spent that time on yourself first. So I don't want people to miss that, man, because that's a key part of the ingredient.
I'd like to offer like, and the journey never ends, right? Like there is no actual destination, and falling in love with the process. And as I launch this community, there's going to be new challenges, new growth edges for me to go after. And, I like to say on the other side of fear lies freedom. And, for people that are in that place of like, who am I? What am I supposed to be doing? Finding that stillness, finding out what scares you. I mean, that's what I did. What do I fear the most? Like public speaking, stepping up and sharing my wisdom in front of people. Like that's a vulnerable thing to do. And I had the biggest fear for that. And for some reason, I felt like that was my calling. And so I started doing the things to work towards overcoming that fear. And that's what led me down this path to eventually finding this community. It was going towards my fear, not shying away from it. And I think that's really important for people to understand. If you really want to become free, it's about finding inner freedom from the stories of why you think you can't do something. And that those are the things that are holding you back. If you can learn to go towards those, understand where they stem from, and move them out of the way, then you can step up and grow in a big way. And that's what entrepreneur journey is. It's like, okay, what is keeping me back? What is the block? What is the resistance? Uncovering what that is, moving it out of the way, and then allowing yourself to grow through that and step up in a bigger way.
Man, tons of gems right there, Joe. Man, okay. I really want to dive into the Heart Collective, but I want to stay on this just for a second, because this ties back into what you were saying about when you went to Fit for Service. And I think a lot of that is because I want, especially former athletes listening right now, to understand that, of course, you got to be intentional, but you also want to get some help from outside forces, whether that's a coach or just personal development, different communities, whatever that looks like, so that you can kind of get those stories out of the way. For example, are you familiar with the Landmark Forum, Joe?
I am not.
Okay, so it's basically a personal development type thing. You know, it's like coaching, all that type of stuff. And that was my Fit for Service, essentially, where I learned that, you know, me being tough or being afraid to fail in front of other people was something that was holding me back. So now that it was on my radar, kind of like you're saying, once it's on your radar, now you know, oh, okay, when it pops up, you know, this is what's holding me back from doing what I need to do or what I want to do. So you can address it and almost realize a story versus what's actually true. So I just wanted to encourage people, because when you were talking about the story, that it just went off in my head, like people need to understand that too, that you want to identify what stories are blocking you so that you can eliminate them and not allow them to stop you from doing what you want to do. Not even just for yourself, but for the impact you can have on other people.
Yeah. And I mean, it is all stories, right? Like on the deepest level down, if in this very present moment, me and you, like what makes us different? It's the stories of who we think we are. And so your story is going to be different than my story. Your fears are going to be different than my fears. And so like on a basic level, me and you are capable of achieving exactly the same thing. The only thing that's keeping us from that is the beliefs of why we can't. And understanding those stories, where they stem from, that's a lot of it's like childhood trauma work, right? And it's not trauma like, oh, something really bad happened to me, but it's like, you know, understanding when you were growing up, there's different things that happened in your life that created the story of how you relate to the world and the lens in which you view the world. And uncovering where those stories come from is a great way to move through those and understand that you are worthy of everything you want to achieve in life. And the only thing holding you back is yourself and the stories of what you think you can't or can. And so if you uncover those stories, you can create a new story for yourself and then go achieve bigger and better things.
Create a new story for yourself, man. We'll just leave it at that. That was fire, Joe. That was awesome, man. I want to dive into, you've already touched on the Heart Collective and told people what it's about. I have a two-part question. Of course, I want to know, like, from A to Z, what people can expect. We already know why you started it, but I'm curious to know, man, why the name? Where did the name Heart Collective come from?
Yeah, man. You know, I was thinking about what to name it, and it actually came to me pretty quick, because I know you know this, and any athlete knows this, and especially, you know, me playing football. One thing that set me apart and led to all the success that I had was the heart it took to play football. And that, you know, that means courage. That means stepping up. And, you know, I like to, you know, when you're on the field and you just playing your heart out, like you're giving it everything you have, and you're doing it for the betterment of the team. Like you're pushing yourself past your breaking point. You're exhausted, that 12 play drive, and you just, you know, you feel like you have nothing else, and you look at your teammates and they're all gassed up, and you're just like, guys, like, let's do this. Let's pull this together. Like that's heart. That takes heart to do that. And I just thought, like, you know, one of the reasons I made it so far is because I have a huge heart, and I showed that on the field with the way I played. And I know a lot of guys understand what that is. And then, you know, on a deeper level, it's really looking into our own hearts and finding out who we are on a deeper level by questioning the stories, uncovering the fears, the things that are getting in the way of ourselves, and then showing up and sharing our hearts with the world. You know, a big part of this community is not just for us as individuals, but I believe it's going to send ripples of positive change out into the world. Because if we can heal ourselves and understand who we are on a deeper level, then the people we come in contact with are going to feel that as well. And so it's really this energy of love and acceptance and courage, and learning how to harness that as a community and send it out into our own communities, have that around our own families, and then sending that out into the world. I mean, that's the bigger vision, is to have a bigger impact on the world by healing ourselves and stepping up and making a big change.
I love it, man. I love it. And I know we're 6 weeks in from the launch date, like we just talked about, but what is the future? Where do you see, we can talk more short-term future or long-term vision of the Heart Collective. Where do you see it going as time continues to go by and more people are getting involved and getting support through that community?
Yeah, right now focused on growing the community. We host the platform on, or host the community on a platform called Mighty Networks, which is like a private social platform where we can all, engage with each other. There's a lot of educational content on there, and I want to get, the big vision is I want to get a proof of concept over, grow the community to 100 members or so from all the major sports leagues. And then, after 12 to 18 months, end up going to all the major sports leagues and becoming the community that helps all these leagues with their transition. It's a big quote unquote problem. I don't think it's like a problem, but it's a unique challenge that a lot of these leagues are trying to add resources to. And I think they're attacking it from, providing these secondary education, career placement, therapy for guys that are really struggling, but there's no real place to go as a guy that's focused on reaching his highest potential and feel supported by a group of men who are focused on the same thing. And so I've realized community is the missing piece. And so if I can partner with all of these major leagues and get them to funnel guys into the community, and then I want to create a forum model where I place guys into small groups, so they can still get that intimate connection. Groups of 7 guys focused on the same thing, have them meet, once bi-weekly or once a month to support one another, and then focus on growing the community as a whole and providing different content. And once this whole COVID thing slows down and the world opens back up, providing in-person experiential retreats so we can connect with each other on a deep level through experience and diving deeper into, the stories of who we are.
I love that, man. I love that you're taking that holistic approach. I mean, you already know this. I'm preaching to the choir, but the work you're doing is so important because, like you said, it's missing. It's one thing to go in there, and I'm not knocking these people, but it's one thing to go in there and do a financial literacy workshop, or do an externship or a resume workshop, but to actually heal the internal part, the internal piece, that's the part that I would argue needs to be done first.
It's the only thing that really matters, right?
It's the only thing. Yeah. All the other stuff is great, but I mean, let's do the financial literacy shop after we put the community portion in place,
Yeah. And that's all going to be a piece of it too. I want to be able to provide content, education, bring on like entrepreneurs, like whatever people want to get involved in, like I want to bring education on that, but it's really understanding our stories and our beliefs. And, it's such a vulnerable state to be in, going through any type of big transition. I mean, especially a pinnacle experience like playing at the professional level, and then all of a sudden that being over, your whole paradigm shifts, your whole experience of reality shifts. And so it's a little bit of a debilitating place to be in. You're like, wait, who am I? Where, like, what is real? Like, what am I supposed to be doing? And it's a vulnerable state to be in. And so being in a community of support of guys going through a similar experience is really powerful, because then you realize, okay, I'm not alone. This is it's not so unique to me. It normalizes the experience. And then being an athlete, you're surrounded by a team your entire life. You're getting coaching your entire life. And all of a sudden that's gone. I mean, it really is like, okay, how do I navigate the world without that? Well, you don't have to anymore. You can join this community and feel supported and learn and grow with one another. And that really, another thing about having community is it's an accountability thing too. Like a lot of guys are like, okay, I want to go focus on becoming the best version of myself. I want to start getting in better shape, change my diet. And it's hard to change habits alone. But when you're doing it as part of a community, there's almost this accountability aspect too. It's like, okay, I want to go to the gym and work on my nutrition. Maybe I'll start next week, But if you have a community of guys that are all showing up for themselves and each other, then it allows you this, accountability to show up for yourself and for others as well.
Man, that's awesome, Joe. And I want to go back to something you said earlier, because even hearing you describe everything you're up to now with the Heart Collective and what your new mission is, it's evident that the fire is back. Because you talked about earlier where for the first time in your life, you were content with not being on the field. And that's when you knew it was time to pivot. And now you've got that fire back to your new mission. So I think now would be a good time because through the Power of Story podcast, there are a lot of, aspiring entrepreneurs who listen to this show. Through Thrive After Sports, there are a lot of former athletes who are trying to find that next stage in their life. Can you just give some advice to people who may be content with where they're at right now, not excited when they wake up in the morning, but just content or lost? Like, how would one, and obviously everyone's journey is different, we both know that, but how does one go about getting that fire back, identifying it, and then just living out that passion in everyday life?
Yeah, I think you said it, like finding a reason to get out of bed in the morning, right? That's what everybody's looking for. And I think the biggest thing I would offer is getting outside your comfort zone. I think us as humans, we're all looking to create something real, some kind of routine, something comfortable, something to hang on to. And I think the problem with that is if we're comfortable our whole lives, we're going to be the type of people that wake up when we're 65, 70 years old and be like, well, what happened? Where'd life go? And understanding the impermanence of life. I like to remind myself of the impermanence, right? I don't think a lot of people think about death that often. It's like, okay, this experience is going to be over sometime. It's not infinite. And we can get deeper in levels of spirituality and maybe the experience is infinite. But as far as this iteration of time in this human body, Joe's going to die someday. And that's one thing that every human shares. And it's actually a beautiful thing, because without death, there would be no reason to live fully. And so I think, really understanding what it is you want to experience in this life while you've been given this gift to be on this planet. And that will get you moving. And a lot of times the challenge is it's going to take you getting outside your comfort zone to figure out what that is, trying new things, not being scared to fail at things, because it really is all about experiences. And I tell myself all the time, like, I want to experience and take advantage of this opportunity I've been given. And so I'm going to do and experience all of the things I want to in this life. And knowing that if there's something you want to experience and it feels like it's so impossible, it's not. Like, if somebody has achieved it or done it, you can learn from them. And, I think looking at where you want to be, finding people that are there, and then figuring out, kind of deconstructing it from there, right? Like, what does that person do on a daily basis? What are their habits? And what we need to do is embody that type of person that achieves that kind of thing or that kind of experience. And then that experience will end up finding us. A lot of people look outside themselves and be like, well, I want to achieve that, or I want to accomplish that, or I want to experience that, but there's no way I can. And it's like, well, yeah, I mean, you tell yourself you can't, you're not going to be able to. But if you work towards embodying the type of person that gets to have those experiences or gets to achieve those things or find success in that, and you work on embodying that first internally. And, the cool thing about the time we live in is we have access to all these amazing people through books, even just connecting with them directly through social media. And you can learn what they do to get to where they're at, and you work on those things first, and then those experiences will find you, I promise.
Oh man, see, I'm not even going to throw in my 2 cents on that, Joe, because I think you just articulated that perfectly. I think for anybody struggling right now, just run back that last 60 seconds or 2 minutes, however long Joe was going in for, and get your pen and your notepad ready and just take notes on all that, because that was the recipe right there. Everything he just laid out is the complete recipe for everything you need, man. I do want to talk about how you touched on death. A lot of people are afraid to talk about it. They think it's a touchy subject. But one of the things that's great about realizing that our time here on this earth is limited, like you said, is that it forces you to realize, wow, I don't have all the time in the world. And then it starts, not only that, it gives you a sense of urgency, but it also gives you like thinking about what you want people to say about you when you leave this earth, like what you want your legacy to be. And real quick, man, how are we doing on time, by the way? I'm on my phone, so I can't.
Oh, we're good.
Are we good?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay.
We're rolling.
Because recently, since we connected, man, I became a fan of your podcast, both of your podcasts. So for those of you who don't know, Joe is a 2-time podcast host. We got
working on a third one too.
Word? Can we talk about that, or is it you want to wait till you announce it? What's the third one going to be about?
Yeah, well, I'll talk about the first two. I got Quantum Coffee, which is it's just a fun conversational piece that I started. I love discussing the unanswerable questions of the universe. I bring on guests from a wide variety of different places, and I ask them pretty much all 3 questions. What's the purpose of life? How did we come to be? And what do you think happens when we die? And that has led to some pretty fascinating questions. I think it's a really unique podcast where we can talk about, not just like the next book that I came out with or the next program I developed, but really just, discussing these unanswerable questions of the universe and spirituality and God, and like, what does it all mean? And, so many people have different ideas. And I think that's the cool thing about being in this universe is we are the universe experiencing itself, trying to understand what it is. And I don't think there is any end to it. And so the discussion topics can just open up in a lot of different beautiful ways. The second podcast is Life Beyond the Game. And that one is more geared towards the community, the Heart Collective, where I bring on former professional athletes and we talk more about, behind the scenes stuff, stuff that normal people don't really hear about, their stories as individuals and how they handled the transition process, which is really beautiful to get to know some of these athletes on a deeper level, behind the face mask and who they are. And then the third podcast I'm working on is with my beautiful wife. That's going to be more of like a reality show type audio experience, which is kind of unique. I don't think there's anything really out there like that, where we kind of talk about, how we met. We met right at the beginning of COVID. Now we have a baby boy on the way and we're married, and it's just been a really divine experience. And so she's a badass entrepreneur as well. So we talk a little bit about business, but it's more about our lives and how we, our relationship and how we consciously relate and how we, love each other fully, and the stories that we've worked through to be able to find the deep connection that we found. And then, having a child and bringing a child into this reality as well, and how to do that, and share that kind of wisdom that we're learning on the journey as it happens. I think is going to be really cool. That's going to come out probably not for another couple months, but I'm really excited about the impact that one's going to have, because I think it's going to relate to a lot of people and give them an opportunity to really deepen their connections and their relationships and understand how to start a family and kind of the lessons that we learn as we go. Like, we don't really know, but we're just sharing it as we go. And it's really a beautiful, beautiful experience.
That's awesome, man. I'm excited for that one, because you got sports covered, you got kind of like the deeper meaning of life covered, and now you're going to be talking about family and relationships. And I think that's really cool, man. When's the baby due?
Baby is due on March 20th. And I think the big thing like about the podcast, and this is going to be, we're doing it in seasons. So like the first season is going to come out, and it's going to talk about from when we first met into when we got married, and kind of, bringing the pregnancy and the story behind that. And then the second season is going to go from when we got married into the birth of our child. And we decided to have a home birth, which nowadays it's really fascinating the amount of resistance that brings up in people. To have a home birth. I think everybody automatically assumes you need to go to a hospital. Like, it's a really dangerous experience to have a kid. And we understand that there is a lot of stories out there, but we have done a lot of research, and it's really fascinating. This idea of giving birth in a hospital is not very old. I think it's like, within the last 100 years that people stopped, looking at birth as a natural process of life and really looking at it as a really fearful experience. And we've decided to really honor the experience and the gift that it is, and doing it in the comfort of our home. And we're really excited about sharing that experience and kind of the journey and resistance we've faced through sharing that with our family and loved ones, and the fears that come up and being able to navigate that. I think a lot of people who are, deciding to have kids or have had kids, how to navigate that in a real world way is really going to add a lot of value.
Yeah, I think that's really cool, man. The fact that you're documenting that and then doing it from a different perspective too, kind of removing the fear from it, like you said, the same way that you talked about removing the fear from death, removing the fear from birth as well, and talking about how it can be done more naturally. I think that's really awesome, man. And like I said, becoming a fan of your podcast since we connected, like you have those 3 questions you ask people, and I just wanted to flip it on you, man, just to kind of ask you, like, we might have to do another hour off of this or have you back on the podcast, but let's just start with this one, because you already kind of dived into the purpose of life. But what is your definition of God? I'm curious to know your perspective on that.
Yeah. So, I grew up in a Christian household, and I had a lot of questions around that specific faith and religion, a lot of questions that weren't really answered. And, it's developed this deep curiosity in myself and deep seeker of truth. So it's opened my mind to search out my own truth through my own experience. And like I said earlier in the podcast, like, I found God through being in nature out on the road and finding that connection. But what I've learned, diving deep and kind of circling back, the biggest difference between, my experience of what God is and what I was taught as a kid and what the Christian belief system kind of creates is is they believe God is separate from who we are. God is some man up in the sky who created this world, and it is separate. I've come to find and believe that God is all, right? When they talk about God as omnipresent, the Alpha, the Omega, there's nothing outside of God. And it's hard for people to conceptualize that, but we are all experiencing the experience of God, right? And so what I like to say is, and I think a lot of people have resistance to the word God. I know I used to, because of what it implies, but understanding what really God is just a word that we use to describe the ineffable experience of what we are having, right? And so there's a lot of different words that different religious philosophies come up with to describe that experience. But as soon as you try to put it into words, you're losing the actual meaning of what it is, because it's outside of our perception of what we can even comprehend. And so I like to use the word the universe, right? The universe is a lot more accessible to me because the universe is God. And I think they're synonymous. So I like to use the word the universe. And I think we are the universe experiencing itself, right? And, you know, I could get really deep into this, like you said. But even like in the Bible, it talks about God created us in his image, and God created man because he wanted to feel the love of that man has for him. And that's in this, if you look at that from the perspective of separation, God is something that created us to love back on him. But I think God is everything and nothing, right? And they talk about the Big Bang, like we came from nothing and just exploded into everything. And so God created this experience to have an experience, because without the separation, there would be no experience. And so us coming out of nothing into everything, we are God experiencing itself. And so when I learn to deeply connect with another and have that love, that's God loving himself. And you know, that's just kind of a brief overview of what I believe. And I've learned a lot through my own study of different philosophies, different religions. And I think the beautiful thing is they're all trying to make sense of the same thing. And it's really sad for me to see the division that religious belief systems create, because people attach to I'm right, you're wrong. And if you're right, then I might be wrong. And so I need to attach to my belief. But I think transcending those attachments to thinking that we know what this experience really is, I think the wisest thing anybody can really say is, I don't know. And that's why I love exploring these ideas. And I have openness to what other people's experiences are. But I really think it comes down to not creating your experience of what God is from somebody else telling you what it is, but really having your own experience of what it is. And I've experienced it for myself. And so I have my own knowing, and nobody can take that away from me. But if somebody else's knowing is different and they've had that experience, then I'm totally okay with that, because we don't really actually know. We just try to create these words around what the experience actually is.
Right. Yeah. Agreed, man. The words do kind of, they kind of lessen the experience of what it is we're actually talking about. I love, and it does become tribal, like you said, rather than being like all roads lead to the same path. This is what we're all seeking. It can easily become, well, I'm on team this, and your beliefs are wrong, and this, and that. When at the end of the day, we all want the same thing. I really love how you touched on how the Bible says God made us in his image. And I feel like man, over the X amount of, centuries or whatever, has created God in our image, almost like trying to make it, one of the first things I don't even want to get too deep into this, because that's not why we're here. We'll do this in another episode.
Maybe I'll bring you on Quantum Coffee, dude, and then we can talk about this. That'd be awesome.
I would love to, man. Yeah, I would love to, especially since I've been a fan of the show for quite some time now. I'd love to come on and talk about this.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd love to have you.
Yeah, I have my own type of experience, input or opinions on that type of stuff too. But we'll get into that at another time, man. I think we'll wrap it up from here. I just want to, first of all, thank you for coming on, man. Thank you for all the work that you're doing to support the former athlete community. I know you're just getting started, and it's already having such a huge impact, not only through the Heart Collective, but through the podcast, just through the general content you put out. I just want to acknowledge you for that, brother, and just say, you're doing great work. It's a pleasure to have you come on and share. Can you please just tell people how they can support what you're doing, how they can follow your journey, how they can get in touch with you, all that kind of good stuff?
Yeah, brother. Thank you. It's really been an honor, and I really appreciate the opportunity. If you're interested in learning more about the Heart Collective, it's spelled HART, and you can go find us online at theheartcollective.com. That's HART. And of all the social platforms, you can find me on Instagram at joe.hawley. That's Hawley. I'm pretty active on that. So if you want to reach out and DM me, I'll definitely respond. And then through that, the link in the bio has kind of all the content I'm working on. I have a newsletter that I release weekly. Yeah, and then the podcast, Quantum Coffee and Life Beyond the Game. Go check those out wherever you listen to podcasts, and share them with your friends, and leave a review if it calls to you. And if you enjoy it, I'd love to hear from you.
Awesome, man. Hey, well, this has been another great episode of the Power of Story podcast and Thrive After Sports. My man, Joe Hawley. Go get in touch with this man. Go support what he's doing. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you next time.